Okay, we're going to start in our little hummingbird garden where we have our summer color here for ornamental, but then the hummingbirds and bees like the flowers, most of the flowers that we've got in here. We have really heavy soils here, so there are quite a number of things that I can't grow in the ground or I can't overwinter in the ground. So you see a lot of containers in this area. We'll come back to that in a minute. So we have a number of non-native species here. One thing that bees really like are herbs. So we've got lavender, something called germander, which hasn't started to flower yet, but the bees like that. And then when we have eruptions of woodland skippers, well, whenever there's a woodland skipper butterfly around, they flock to the germander. We have a fair bit of oregano in here that has naturalized, and that's a great bee plant. We have the main blue flower that's blooming now is called catmint, Walker's Low. It's not native, but the bees and the hummingbirds like it. We're early in the season, but what I have in here is a lot of goldenrod. You may identify the goldenrod plants there. We've got a lot of Douglas aster. These are both native. We've got showy milkweed, and I'm trying to restart the narrow-leaved milkweed, the Asclepias fascicularis. So it's tiny back there. We have Monarda. The cultivar I like is Jacob Klein, which is a dark red cultivar, and the hummingbirds like that. Again, you can see the plants out there, but they're not blooming yet. Then we've got a couple of non-native yarrows, which the birds and the bees don't really care for, but they provide a nice yellow in there. In the containers, we mostly have species that don't overwinter in our soils very well. So mostly Augustaceae and salvias. So I put the containers under the eaves so they don't get, or through the winter, so they don't get too wet. Heath is on some Augustaceae now. The real winner among Augustaceae hasn't started to bloom yet. It's called Tutti Frutti, and it by far is the most favorite nectar plant of the of the rufous hummingbird. Well, the annas too, for that matter. And we've got some penstemons in here. They're too low to see, mostly. On the ground, we have Fragaria vesca, wood strawberry, which is a native. And the little succulent is Tolmie's saxifrage, and it'll be blooming in June into July, and it's a great bee plant. This carpet of Tolmia will be covered with bees when that flowers. The one last thing, this little garden here then, in terms of the structural diversity, besides the biological diversity, we like to have structural diversity. So we've got a thicket around here that so the birds can perch and hide, get out of the way of the jays in here. And we also have some water features that they'll even hunt. Come down and use.
Do you have more than that water feature?
There are two drippers. One is hidden already behind, underneath the Joe Pye weed. The pump broke on our main one here, which is really nice.
Oh.
So it's not running today.
That looks like a stream?
Yeah.
Kind of? Yeah.
We had a little one for many years, but it was was having some problems, so we had it replaced this year. It's nice and noisy and it's attractive to birds, but it hasn't been too robust yet. So we're working on that. Okay, in front of Heath here we have the yellow composite flower is Waiithia angustifolia, which is a nice prairie plant. It's actually done very well here. I collected seed several years ago for that. We have some varieties of California fuchsia here. That'll bloom in July with nice orange trumpet-shaped flowers that both the bees and the hummingbirds like. Heath commented on the fact that we have a fair bit of bare ground in here. That's partly a function of the harsh soils. We never get it completely covered, but it's good for ground nesting bees to have that available, that resource available for them to burrow in and not disturb it too much. Got a little brush pile here. I don't want too big a brush pile in the yard, but this is an area, especially in the wintertime when we have a lot of sparrows in here feeding on the ground, that they'll use this for cover. And a jay planted an Oregon white oak here. I don't know if this is where I want the oak to be permanently, but it's good for now.
The people are coming to fix it?
Well, Shauner's installed it. Yeah, unfortunately this is goldenrod. That hides it in the summertime, but that's fine. It gives them a private space.
Do they like it because it's hidden, or like that makes them feel safer, right?
Right. I came out here at about 2:15. I thought, well, let's see what's happening today. We've got over a dozen species using the yard on a hot afternoon. Okay, we're going to look at some of the trees and shrubs, native trees and shrubs we have in the yard here. And we're going to start in close, so you can think of these plants as bird feeders. Now, if you really want a big bang for your buck to bring a lot of birds in, mainly in the winter time, then you can use seed. And we do have that. We don't have much seed out in the summer, but they don't use it much. But for kind of a low, a small bit of entertainment coming through these during the summertime, these natives are attractive to birds that are searching for insects to feed themselves and their young. And this is why natives are so important to birds, is because many more insects, maybe 10 times as many insects, use our native plants here as opposed to non-natives. Now those non-natives are native somewhere else and they're good for birds there, but not here. And so these species are really good at drawing birds in. So I'll start. We have a golden currant, which is slightly out of range here. It's northwest, but it has bright yellow flowers when it flowers. And then behind that, that small globe-shaped tree is a red elderberry. It's beautiful when it flowers in April, and it produces a crop of red berries. Now, interestingly, in recent years, our black-headed grosbeaks eat the green fruit, so not many ripen. For some reason, and I noticed the other day evening grosbeaks as well, which aren't even closely related to black-headed grosbeaks, eat green fruit. I don't know why. But it's nonetheless attractive to birds. And then besides the fruit, you see warblers and so forth gleaning branches and leaves looking for caterpillars. Then coming down behind the feeder, we have Philadelphus lewisii, mock orange. That will be blooming in a couple of weeks. There's actually one that's hidden. It's growing within some of the other plants. It's already blooming. It's probably hard to see in this light. So we have mock orange, and then the tallest shrub there is called chokecherry. It flowered in April, and it'll produce a small crop of fruit. to the right of that, you might have seen the Steller's jay jump out of it, is a plant called Cascara, which is very common, but it's easy to overlook. It doesn't have showy flowers, it doesn't have showy fall color, but it's a very attractive wildlife plant. Not only the fruit, which birds seek avidly, we have all kinds of thrushes and towhees and tanagers, finches coming in to look for ripe cascara berries in August, I would say. But they also glean that plant looking for insects. Moving to the right, I've got several plants of red flowering currant, which flowers here in late March and early April. So it's a beautiful display of showy red flowers, which any nectar-feeding bird will feed on. And it also is a really good insect plant. So in the summertime, before the fruit have ripened, you see birds in here looking for insects. To the right of the currant, we have a species of manzanita. I think this is Arctostaphylos manzanita, so it has the specific name as the common name. So I've got a number of manzanita species scattered around here. There's a large one just behind the currant. They flower in January, February into March, and the anise hummingbirds, and then when the rufous come back, they'll feed on the nectar. A small tree that's easy to spot is the Pacific madrone here. The birds planted that seed for me many years ago. We're in a site down in the bottom of this valley that they don't grow very well, but it grows, and the birds feed in there. At the just behind the Pacific madrone, we have a coyote bush, which is again not a showy ornamental, but a plant that insects are attracted to. Insects are attracted to, and it flowers in September to feed on the nectar and pollen preparatory to overwintering. So we have a cluster there of the coyote bush and the madrone. To the right of the madrone in front is a Pacific dogwood, and that has done pretty well. It has had a couple of cankers on it. Dogwoods, our native dogwoods, have some introduced diseases, so they're hard to grow, but this one's hung in there. It has a very nice display in April, and it sets some fruit that the birds eat later. Behind the dogwood is a vine maple. Again, a good foraging plant, and our vine maple and our big leaf maple, when they flower, are attractive to pollinators, even to some nectar-feeding birds. Moving into the back, we might as well go from right to left. We get kind of along the stream, Oak Creek, and in front, so those big trees, deciduous trees, are alder, mostly red alder. I think there's a white alder or two. And those are good insect plants. The real excitement here for me is in spring and fall migration, when our neotropical migrants are surging north or drifting back south. And so a certain number of them move along the creek here, and so they'll work their way through these various species. But the alder is a good one, partly because there are insects, but also it's a big species. So the bird species that like to be up higher will use that space. We have chokecherry back there. We have maple. There's a big leaf maple back there. More vine maple. You can see here a blue elderberry, kind of a coarse light green leaf. The fruit ripen in September, and if the black-headed grosbeaks haven't eaten the green fruit, then band-tailed pigeons and cedar waxwings and robins and Swainson's thrush and other species will eat the fruit. We have another nice cascara next to that, and in the back behind the cascara is a species of willow. And I've forgotten the species. I had a student many years ago who worked for the plant materials lab in town and took my course in plant propagation. He gave me several willow selections of theirs, and I planted them around. That's one of them. Many years ago, almost 40 years ago, I planted a noble fir here that I got from work, and it did very well. It was a beautiful tree, but it's off-site, and eventually it died. And I'm not sure why, but I'm keeping it there because dead wood is a really important component of the food web that you're trying to build in a bird garden. And so fortunately I don't have grandkids, so they won't be in danger if they're playing out in the yard when that falls down. And then lastly, behind the noble fir, we have Oregon white oak. And in terms of insects on plants, that's the premier species. And I don't have a number, but oaks are very attractive to insects. And back in the day, before we had so much climate change, the peak of spring migration was timed to the bud break of the Oregon white oak, because there was so much insect activity associated with that. And I'm not so sure that that still holds very well, but it indicates the importance of it. If we looked up in the big Douglas fir, in the background, you may be able to see the gloss of the leaves of wild California grape, which I brought in 10 or 20 years ago. It's a little bit out of range, so it's not native yet. It gets up into around Roseburg, I think, is the north end of its range. But I put it in for the first reason was to provide another source of fruit. It ripens in October, and if we have a cool summer, it ripens in late October, and most of the fruit doesn't ripen. But the birds are very avid about finding the ripe grapes. If we have a hot summer, then it ripens in mid-October, and most of the crop ripens. And so the woodpeckers, pileated woodpecker comes in for that, robins and waxwings and thrushes. You can just see the whole vine shaking up there with birds taking fruit. The other thing that the big vine adds is more structure, so that besides just having a Douglas fir there, then you've got these other deciduous branches, nearly native, interwoven in there, which provides places for cover for birds and insects to hide in. And so that particular grape goes all the way to the top of that Douglas fir, which is probably, maybe 80 feet tall. So a very big, aggressive plant. And there could be other vines that would suit smaller spaces. So for instance, maybe honeysuckle would work in a smaller tree and be more easily controllable. What you probably don't want to use is something like English ivy, which would be then an invasive species. You don't want to contribute more to the problem that ivy already provides. Another aspect of having a diverse garden is the biodiversity is to not only have a large suite of insects, but just part of the value of having fruit ripening over the course of the summer, because not all of our natives flower and fruit at the same time. So our first flowering plant is Indian plum, which we've got out in the understory in the back here. Flowers in January and February, and its fruit will be ripening maybe now in some warmer spots, but then in June. That'll be the first fruit that's available. And then in June we would have red elderberry. Going through the summer we would have the chokecherry, then cascara in August, blue elderberry in September, probably the Pacific dogwood in August and September. We go into the fall, and I was talking about the wild grape, so that's sometime in October. Madrone, if we have a crop of fruit, then they would ripen in November, probably more into December. We have a few wax myrtles. This is not a good site for wax myrtle. I have a few struggling plants around, but those little waxy fruits ripen in December and are very attractive to yellow-rumped warblers, which, as the birders among you know, that one of the subspecies of yellow-rumped warbler is called the myrtle warbler, because it likes those waxy fruits, but both subspecies will eat them. Also in the summer we have the currants that flower. They don't seem to be a real favorite of birds, but they must eat them because seedlings pop up all around the yard, so they must be eating them and then pooping the seed out. So I collect the seedlings and spread them around to have more currants. Okay, birds that we think of as fruit eaters or seed eaters still need a lot of insects to feed their kids, their nestlings. Entomologists in Delaware did a study where they estimated the number of insects that was needed to raise a single chickadee, and it was something like 6,000 to 8,000 insects. So it's an incredible number out there. So even birds we think of like sparrows still need a lot of insects. Cedar waxwings is a classic fruit eater, and even though they like chokecherries, would probably be the first one that they glom onto here in the summer, but they love hawthorns, especially the English hawthorn, which we have a lot of, is an invasive species, but our Oregon hawthorn, which is a species I forgot to mention, which is out in the landscape here. They like the cascara, the dogwood, the Pacific dogwood, the blue elderberry they're very fond of. They love the California grape and the madrones, so anything they can get. But crab apples, another mostly non-native species, but they'll eat just about any fruit. But to get to that point, when the fruit starts to ripen, they need insects. So we think of Oregon as being a rainy place, but we don't get rain in the summer. That's what makes it so beautiful. And so our native plants are generally adapted to getting through the summer once they're established without much rain. Now, there are some plants that are adapted to wetlands, along riparian areas and so forth, but for the more upland types of species, they just have to be adapted to getting through. So I've gotten to the point where I water very little over the course of the summer, especially the trees and shrubs. Once they're established, I'll water them some to get them established, say every couple of weeks through the first summer. But then I'll probably water twice, a couple of deep soakings in July and August, not so much to help them survive. They're going to survive fine, but they'll look better. Just look a little healthier and ripen their fruit better if they've had some water. Now the perennials do need more water, but most of them are fairly relatively drought tolerant, especially the things like goldenrod and the Douglas aster and the Wyethia. They don't need a lot of water. Some of the others get watered occasionally, again, to keep them looking good. Mostly I've selected pretty drought resistant plants.